Welcome back to the program. It's October 23rd. Welcome back to the Frank Roche Show, the Frank Roche Podcast, Hot Topics. I want to talk to you about tariffs today. Donald Trump getting lots of pushback from the left, of course, and the mainstream free trade economists, the globalists, about his plan to impose tariffs on imports to help protect domestic industry, reverse our massive trade imbalance, and restore some manufacturing power in the United States. Keep in mind our own elected officials at the federal level, decades after decades after decades, have imposed a unilateral free trade policy on America that has allowed foreign companies to trounce U.S. domestic companies, to hollow out the manufacturing sector, whittle away the middle class, and leave the United States with trillion-dollar annual goods deficits for 4 years in a row. This has been going on since 1974, when Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger opened up trade with China in an effort to combat Russia and to appease American multinational corporations who wanted access to the Chinese market and the billions of people that live in there. The United States has been beaten at the trade negotiating table since that time, and we have the trade data to prove it. For decades and decades, globalists, mainstream economists, free trade economists, college professors have poo-pooed the idea of using tariffs to protect domestic industry or to manage our trade imbalance. And they've all been wrong. And as my college professors will know from the 1980s, I've been right on this the whole time, as will all my friends and family. The other way we can help manage our trade balance and protect domestic industry is through quotas, and we did that in the late 1980s with Japanese cars. Tariffs benefit the home economy insofar as tariffs are a tax on imports, and that tax revenue goes to the U.S. government. Quotas benefit the foreign company and country, and so tariffs are the way to go when you are confronted with, for the fourth year in a row, a $1.1 trillion trade deficit in goods, which is what we have coming up in 2024. So the correct policy, given America's trade deficit, given the hollowing out of manufacturing, given the effort by China and other multinational corporations to use Mexico as their way in, tariffs are required. Are tariffs inflationary? Yes, they are. They don't have to be, but they're going to be. One of the challenges that President Trump has with imposing tariffs now, at this time in our history, we don't produce many consumer goods. And for that matter, many advanced technology goods. You won't be surprised to hear, not only do we run a trade deficit in goods, we also run a trade deficit in advanced technology. And we have for decades and decades. The idea coming out of the 1970s and 80s is America would concentrate on the capital goods, the high-tech goods, the value-added goods. In Asia, led by China, will focus on the consumer goods, the low margin, low value added consumer goods. Today, we have a trade profile more closely aligned with developing country than a developed country. We export unfinished goods and we import finished goods. And the data tells the whole story. For 2024, we will run approximately $1.136 trillion trade deficit in goods. Year to date, we have data through August of 2024. And as of right now, at the end of August, awaiting September data, our trade deficit for 2024 in goods is $757.6 billion. Minor extrapolation through December gets us to a $1.136 trillion trade deficit in goods for 2024, the fourth year in a row. As you can see on the screen, going back to the farthest date that the Census Bureau has data online, in 1987, we had a trade deficit in goods of $152 billion. Fast forward to 21, in the first year of running a $1 trillion trade deficit, of $1.07 trillion trade deficit in 2021. You can see in 2022, we hit a record high trade deficit, $1.173 trillion. In 2023, $1.06 trillion. And now in 2024, we're going to move back up to $1.136 trillion approximately. It could get worse. It might be a little better, but we'll definitely be over $1 trillion again. That represents a massive transfer of income from the United States to the rest of the world, primarily China. About 38%, 40% of our trade deficit in goods is with China, although that's beginning to improve a little bit as MNCs move out of China and try to relocate to Vietnam, India, Mexico, searching out for that low-wage labor force. You can see here on the chart from Fred, since 1991, you can see the massive increase in our trade deficit in goods. Now, let's wrap our head around this a little bit. When we look at the net number, so our trade deficit, exports minus imports, or called net exports, on a net basis, we have transferred, since 1987, $21 trillion of our income to foreign countries. That's net. On a gross basis, since 1987, we have transferred $60.259 trillion of our income to foreign countries. Now, let's keep in mind real quick, same party trade. I would say about 34% of that trade imbalance, that transfer, is goods imported by American branded products. Keep in mind, our elected officials set up our trade policy so that it would be beneficial for U.S. companies to close down manufacturing in the United States and ship it overseas to low-wage countries, and then maintain low trade barriers of imports into our country so our own companies, our own domestic companies, could import goods more cheaply. Notice in the chart the very obvious inflection point around the year 2000. Remember, in 1999, Bill Clinton, along with Dick Armey, the Republican Party, pushed through permanent normal trade relations with China that allowed China to ascend to the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And since that time, you can see on the chart how rapidly things deteriorated. Absent the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, you can see the trend line pretty obviously on the chart. We have failed in negotiating trade. When it comes to China, we have failed miserably. China won. If you want to sell your products in China, China said to America, you have to manufacture in China. You want access to our 1 billion people, our 1 billion customers, you need to make your goods in China. And then American politicians kept trade barriers here, that is trade barriers against imports, low, so that those multinational corporations could ship those goods back to us cheaply. Horrible, horrible policy. It has wiped out the middle class. It's wiped out our manufacturing sector. And the data tells the story. For what's good for the U.S. economy in the future, for what's right by American citizens and American workers and American labor, it is time to impose tariffs on imports. It is time to renegotiate our trade deals with most of Asia, even Europe. And one of the first steps we can take is raising tariffs. We have a trade problem. The data reveals that. And this is one of the best solutions to correct that. And by the way, free trade does not exist. Never has, never will. Which is to say, no trade barriers imposed by any country on the flow of imported goods into a country. Tariffs were the main source of income for the federal government for much of our history prior to the introduction of the income tax. That was how countries made their tax revenue, through tariffs, through protecting domestic industry and taxing imports. And we need to get back to that. Donald Trump is right on this. We have a serious trade problem. The globalists, the left, even many of the Republican Party have been wrong for decades. And now, once again, in 2024, we're going to run over $1 trillion trade deficit in goods. Keep in mind, we're going to run a $1.5 trillion deficit at the federal level, a budget deficit. We have $35 trillion in debt. So we need to correct some of these anomalies that have been plaguing America's economy, structural barriers to American strength and prosperity. It's a long road back, but we have to do something at some point. It is our trade policy and the trade policy of Western nations, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, that have allowed China to grow rich And now China is our adversary. China is our strategic foe. China now has the means to provide a military that will allow them to attack Taiwan, take over Taiwan, and still deflect the United States military from coming to their aid. Tariffs, do we want them? Ideally, no. Do we need them? Yes. Is Trump right about that? Yes. That's why, as I end every show, as I will do right now, always try to buy American.